Good morning, Angela, and thank you for joining us in our new series, Conversations in Australian Applied Linguistics. Thank you for agreeing to be part of it. Now I'm just going to ask you a few questions, and then we will have an online forum in a couple of weeks to follow up so that people can actually meet with you and ask any further questions. So my first question is one that we are often asked as applied linguists, and that is, what is applied linguistics?
Well, before we get started, Michelle, I do want to recognise that applied linguistics in Australia and elsewhere owes a lot to Tim McNamara. And we can't begin a series of anything without thinking of Tim's immense wisdom and contribution. Also coming immediately after the referendum, a personal note for me is a deep sadness that another issue of languages, cultures, and recognition is an opportunity that has not eventuated in a way that I had hoped, particularly now speaking about applied linguistics in our world as we meet on Kaurna land. And certainly we respect Aboriginal ways. So with those preliminaries, let's say, well, what is applied linguistics? There is a specialist version perhaps and a lay version. And when we speak to our colleagues who might say, oh, you're applied linguist, what does that mean? It will be one answer. And when we think about the field, it's quite a different one. And I think that there have been many attempts to respond to the question, huge debates, the linguistics applied linguistics, and so on. But in the end, I think that it is profoundly about language and the distinctive interest, if not passion, that we have is to look at how language manifests in different ways in diverse contexts. We're interested in language use. And the moment we go to language use, it's a more complex affair, and language use relates to meaning and how we exchange meanings. And of course, the moment that we go to meanings, we understand that meanings are also about knowledge and culture and the histories that people bring in the exchange of meanings. And so it is also linguistic, cultural, historical, and of course meaningful to people as users of those languages. So we need to be attentive to that. It's a discipline that also encompasses a range of particular areas. There are interests in language teaching and learning, English language and the huge array of fields around that, language assessment. And so all of these are part of applied linguistics. It's also a discipline that connects across languages and people. It connects various fields, language in education, language in the law, language in science, language in, you name it, engineering, business, and so on. Diverse contexts, language use in diverse contexts and in diverse domains. So we encompass a whole array of connections, I would call those, and with those connections, different people. And then there is applied linguistics as a practice. We work to change things. We want a better understanding of language because it is meaningful in some way to people's lives, to people's way of working, of conducting themselves. And so that's a dimension that perhaps begins to invite questions of an ethical kind, and they are part of our applied linguistics work. And perhaps we also need to recognise that the relation, this interest in language language issues, the different configurations of languages. These are nuanced by different parts of the world. We all work in language, we all do applied linguistic work, but we also find that there's nuance there. Doing applied linguistic work in France is different from doing it in Australia, is different from my own work in Hong Kong. And so we have a nuance that comes from the different configurations of languages in diverse contexts. All of that is part of it. But to go to the layperson's meanings, we have to also think there that for the layperson, I generally do it through examples. You say, well, have you thought about how lawyers use language? Or have you thought about, and in that sense, we get a layperson's perspective of what is applied linguistics.
Makes it live and
Yes.
make it tangible. Yes.
Yes.
Well, how did you end up becoming an applied linguist yourself?
Gosh, I think it was my own multilingual background that got me interested, not just in language, but languages and multilingualism and multiculturalism and so on. I began school with no English. I was Italian only. And so, this fascination.
You were born
this fascination with languages were part and parcel. When I started learning languages in schools, at secondary school only, at that time, I learned French and German. And immediately in my mind, I could make connections across my 4 languages then. And I could see patterns, I could see ways of understanding that emerged differently for me. But interestingly, nobody took notice of the fact that all of this was happening in my mind. And so from there grew a fascination with how is it that people actually learn languages. It was relatively easy for me, but I was making all of these connections and it was kind of fun. It was also the height of multiculturalism as I began progressing in my own education. And I rejected strongly the notion of multiculturalism, for me, multilingualism, but being only a matter of disadvantage. There is disadvantage. Language issues deal with a lot of disadvantage. But for me personally, it was an enrichment. It was multiple ways of seeing. And I guess that I've tried to convey to people that that is also what language and languages, plural, are about. My sense has always been plural. And so I became interested in learning languages, in teaching languages, taught for a very, very short while. And then this developed into an interest around curriculum and assessment, but not as set traditional ways of viewing these things. I was always probing, I have always probed alternatives. I'm not interested in standardized curricula. I'm not interested in standardized forms of assessment, but how can we look at these differently? And of course, also central to both those activities is a concern for the construct. How is it that we construe language for the purposes of learning? How is it that we construe, with language, I say language, culture, and the layers that all that brings, how do we construe that for the purposes of learning and for the purposes of assessment? And I think that the assessment lens, an area that I came to quite reluctantly, but that assessment lens really forces us to think about, well, what is it that we are after here? And my excitement now, the project that I'm really excited about, is how do we evidence this multilingual and intercultural capability, this capability to move between languages and cultures. And I'm sure that we're not even beginning to capture evidence of what it is that folk do. Mm.
Well, you certainly have been a giant in languages curriculum.
I don't know that I'd say giant, please,
a leading scholar in curriculum.
I've had a lot of goes.
And assessment, and particularly more alternative forms of assessment. But you've taken us to, more recent issues. But in thinking about the sort of the history of the field of applied linguistics,
yes.
Really developing mid last century, what have been some of the big milestones or monumental, the major transformative moments that you recall or that have been impactful for you?
Well, all disciplines all disciplines have to evolve and continue to evolve, thankfully. And my interest has always been in expansions, thinking more broadly, thinking more richly, or as richly as we possibly can, because I'm obsessed with the sense that the limits of our conceptualization will limit our practice and our engagement. And so we've seen many expansions. And I guess that one of the key constructs that we've all had to work with in some way is the idea of communicative competence. I think that communication is a weakish word. We like it, and people understand us through that, but it's weak because communication can mean so many things and it's not necessarily that effort at the exchange of meaning, which I see as effortful. And let alone competence, problematic at both in both terms. But I do recognise that at my first go in developing a major curriculum initiative, I was really excited about CAAL and Swain's model and how that gave us, in addition to grammatical competence, which was the order of the day then, to actually have socio-linguistic and discourse competence, strategic competence too, but discourse competence. I was just so excited about that. And then further expansions with my assessment lens, Buckman and Palmer. It didn't capture interactivity and so on, and the power of context and the fact that communication is fluid, but it was another kind of expansion. And then the massive expansion, in my view, with the trajectory that Claire Crumpsh's work has given us of communicative competence to interactional competence to symbolic competence, and recognising the power of language through this notion of symbolic competence. I think that there is a question here of trying to describe our constructs is really difficult. And I think that stays with us. I think that it is a good thing. I'm interested in folk like Maturana and Varela who look at language in relation to the biological organism and things like that. I find it any way of expanding our constructs is helpful.
That cross-pollination that we do with other fields.
Absolutely. And I think that cross-pollination is absolutely crucial. I think too that we've had various turns.
Yes.
We had the social turn with the Furth and Wagner paper. We've had the multilingual turn, which has been very, very welcome. I could mention many people. Stephen May's collection of papers in the book, The Multilingual Turn, Lourdes Ortega, many others. And this is exactly my home. It's the multilingual nature of what we do, and that applied linguistics itself as told in the story of the origin of applied linguistics in Australia, that applied linguistics itself begins in plurality.
Yes.
It's not an English-only affair. Nothing to deny the value and the need for work in English, but a multilingual view of applied linguistics is what I have desired, I have experienced, I have lived, and I'm so engaged with that multilingual term because with multilingual, it is also a question of moving across languages and cultures. And so for me, it's multilingual and intercultural work that, yes, that we're that we're interested in. And so the fact that we're broadening beyond a single language, that we are questioning even the boundaries of language and those kinds of, I think that that is important. I think that the multilingual is also bringing to the fore in a more heightened way the whole notion of meaning and the complexity of exchanging meaning when there isn't a shared world view or a shared cultural situatedness. And so needing to think about how we exchange meanings. And that applies to anything. If I'm reading literature, if I'm reading a scientific report, whatever, it is framed in that particular linguistic and cultural environment. And in order for me to do justice to reading that, I need to be able to operate multilingually and interculturally as far as it's possible to do so. The Europeans call it plurilingual competence, retaining the idea of competence. I prefer capability, but I think that that is certainly movement in the right direction. I also think that it means that we need to recognise the fluidity of language a lot more when we're talking about a multilingual environment, because we have to be attentive as ever to which languages are chosen, when, with whom, why, how is that particular language used. And it opens up and has opened up the agenda beautifully for us. And so that it is forever fluid, and therefore we're talking about a flexible multilingualism. We're trying to find words to capture the dynamism. That's right. And then I have questions like, are we returning to a different kind of cognitive turn, where we look at more computational kinds of processes? We look at AI, as we must do, and exactly, and thinking about those kinds of expansions. And if we think about our colleague Tim McNamara, his invitation to us was exactly in line with your earlier comment that we need to expand our thinking by engaging with critical theory much more broadly. And I think that that brings us to ideas of decoloniality, Southern theories, and that kind of work that must inform our responses, our way of acting towards the betterment of language practices, understanding each other, and so on in our world.
Lovely, lovely. Well, I think you've probably taken us already to my next question, which was, where do you see the field heading?
Well, I think that, yes, I think that this is it. We've had several turns. I hope that we have more of them. We need to theorise afresh, and we need to do that individually for ourselves. We need to do it collectively for our own field, and importantly, we need to do it with others. So expanding the circle of interlocutors that we confer with, that we work with. Our research, my own, has always been with teachers, and taking very much a praxis stance to the work. I mean, you're part of it, Michelle. We do it so much together, which is a joy. So it is praxis orientation in working with a whole range of others, and this means less represented groups, people who have not had a way into applied linguistics because we had constructed it in a particular way. So really opening those boundaries, but doing so purposefully and generously, I think. And of course, we do need to keep our minds open to the technological advances that are ever changing, and this will impact our world.
Any advice to early career applied linguists or those starting out in our field?
Well, I guess in line with my own trajectory, it really is question everything and question deeply. Don't accept the status quo. If an early career researcher submits a proposal for funding or an article, engage with the response, seek the response, learn to refine the arguments, but also trust the new ideas, that the things do not need to happen in a particular fixed way, and try to have the widest vision possible. We need to resource ourselves in order to do rich work that is interested in language and languages, and engages with the diverse others, whether they are in education, where they are in a whole host of other professions, whether they are in different contexts around the world. Engage deeply and look for expansions that our field must make to capture the reality that we're in.
Lovely. Well, thank you, Angela. I know you well, but every time I speak with you in conversation, I learn more and get much from your wisdom and your insights. So thank you for today. And we look forward to continuing this conversation in a couple of weeks' time when we have the online forum.
I look forward to it, and I really congratulate Anna on this initiative. We all do need to talk a lot more to each other, and I'm the privileged one today.
To start us off.
Lovely,
yes,
thank you.
We hope there's many more. So thank you, everyone, and we will talk to you soon.